Hey guys, welcome to the wonderful world of Remnant Radio. My name is Michael Rowntree. Josh Lewis is out. He's traveling. And today, Michael Miller and I are going to talk about what Jack Deere taught us about life and ministry. Both Miller and I were personally discipled by Jack Deere, so we're going to share some personal stories as well as lessons learned. Maybe there will be a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly, but mostly good. And it's a fascinating story. So I look forward to sharing some more of that. But before we dive into that, we just a couple of things just to share with you guys. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can click on that description and find our newsletter, and that's kind of like the avenue for discovering everything else Remnant Radio. And we've got conferences and e-courses, and we just filmed an e-course this summer. Eager to release that here in the near future. But the e-course that's coming up real soon is one that's sort of a bread and butter for us, our Intro to Spiritual Gifts. It's a 10-week discipleship course where we talk all things spiritual gifts, prophecy, healing, casting out demons, and much, much more. And the theology behind it as well is very practical. We've got small groups associated with it, Q&A with the Remnant guys. And so it's a really good tool for growing in your spiritual gifts and growing in this area. So the deadline for signing up for that is September 7th, and it's a session that begins in the fall shortly after. So love for you guys to sign up for that. And then also, I have a note here to bring up Remnant Radio swag. I don't know if this qualifies. It's a conference shirt, but probably doesn't qualify because it's our Remnant Radio shop. It's not going to sell this, but it's going to sell a lot of other Remnant Radio stuff. And so you can go to the remnantradio.com, click on shop, and you'll see some of that swag. And Miller, I think we're instructed we're supposed to wear some of it pretty soon. So
Well, I don't have any of it yet. It hasn't come my
not
way.
yet. But well, hey Miller, welcome to the show, Miller. How are you doing over there in Denver?
I'm good, man. Heading out to Houston this Thursday, and this is actually kind of cool. I'm going to be training some of our prayer ministers for the upcoming Healing and Deliverance Conference. So the goal is to get them as much training and practice, so that way when conference hits, there's going to be more than enough people to pray that are really, really well equipped to pray for healing and deliverance. So I'm kind of excited about that. I got my Basement Boy hat on. That's the closest thing to the Remnant paraphernalia that I've got.
I think there probably a lot of us want that particular swag. We want to be Basement.
Do we have
Boy.
that? Do we have a Basement Boy
I don't
hat?
think so, but it needs to happen.
Josh needs
I've
to
always
do the,
wanted a
Back to
Remnant
the
Radio.
Basement.
I've always wanted a Remnant Radio slanket. You know, the Slain in the Spirit blanket like they have in certain churches, where you fall down and it's like the courtesy blanket that kind of covers, make sure you're not revealing anything you're not supposed to be revealing.
Dude, we should totally
Josh has always said no to that.
Yeah, I know. He probably thinks it's sacrilegious or like poking too much fun, but I think it would be a fun item. That it's like an inside joke with our audience. So I totally think we should do it.
Yeah.
Do you ever see the Blurry Creatures? You see all the paraphernalia they've got?
I haven't seen their paraphernalia.
Oh, dude, they've got some killer t-shirts, and I think everything's blurry, obviously, and it's all about Bigfoot and stuff like that. So anyway, I love the way they do that, and I think we should totally do something similar with all of our inside jokes.
I think I saw
video game.
I think I might have mentioned this on one show, but I was driving through Oklahoma City and I saw somebody with a license plate that said Nephilim on it. And I'm like, yes. Only a very few people really know what that means, but those who do are cracking up right now. So anyway, well, hey guys, we're going to talk about Jack Deere. And so I mentioned that Miller and I are both, we're both in a very personal way discipled by Jack Deere and very grateful for his impact on our lives. So Miller, I kind of thought we'd start out by by just before we even kind of dive into lessons learned, maybe even to just how the connection happened. I'll start with you and then I'll share mine. How the connection happened for you with Jack. So yeah, you want to go there?
Yeah. So I became a Christian when I was 15. Somebody gave me a Bible, but the church I'd started going to that all my friends went to was a cessationist church. So around age 21, I was doing Young Life, asking questions about, the best way to do evangelism. And I would read the scriptures about how, 4,000 people come to believe in Jesus one day because of one miracle. And I'm thinking, like, why not here at Bryan High School, where I was leading a young life team? And so that set me on a journey to understand if the power of God was for today, if miracles still happened, if so, how do they happen? What does that look like? And all I had to go on was the Pentecostal churches that were around the Texas A&M area, College Station, Bryan, Texas. And I couldn't stomach the packaging. It was just culturally unfamiliar and uncomfortable. And they were always trying to get me to speak in tongues, which I just didn't do. And I found that to be sort of a peculiar thing. And so somebody gave me or tipped me off, said, "Hey, you would really appreciate a book by Jack Deere called Surprised by the Power of the Spirit." And so I read it and I was blown away. This guy speaks my language. Like, he's using scripture, he's using reason, theology, and he's making a very compelling case for why the gifts of the Spirit are still here today. And so then I got my hands on Surprised by the Voice of God, Beginner's Guide to the Gift of Prophecy. Those are the three books he had published at that time. Now, when I had read those books, I thought he lived in Montana. And so, because that's where he said he lived when he wrote Surprised by the Voice of God. I think that's in there somewhere. And so I started praying pretty regularly, like, God, would you please let me be discipled by someone like Jack Deere? I just needed somebody who had practical experience that didn't seem crazy to me, that seemed kind of normal and down to earth. And so I had moved to Dallas, not moving. I'd moved to Dallas to take a job with Young Life, and I'm online looking for more literature, and I find the church webpage in Fort Worth, which says that Jack Deere was the pastor. And so I started. I realized, one, that's like only 45 minutes from me, so I started commuting out there twice a week. Now, Michael, you were already there, but
I remember
I
when you
was,
showed up.
yeah, I would sit like right
It
there on
was
the
the
second
smell,
row.
really.
Yeah. Yeah, of course you do. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the smell of I don't know, adolescence, I guess. I just smelled bad.
The
Uh,
fragrance of death. Sorry.
so, thank you for that. But anyway, I next thing I know, I'm meeting with Jack, and he's basically telling me that my career with Young Life is coming to an end. And sure enough, it was. My continuationism, my newfound charismatic beliefs just weren't squaring with my boss at Young Life. And so then, next thing I know, I'm working with you as a youth intern, and being discipled by Jack, which was what I had prayed for. I'd prayed to be discipled by someone like Jack, having no clue that I would actually get to be discipled by him. So that's kind of how that began. And you have a very similar story, which makes this so much fun. Go for it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. So, I started out in a very charismatic church. And then when I went to college, I went to a very not charismatic church. And so I had this sort of pendulum swing, and the non charismatic church was very steeped in the word. And I loved that. And so I had this spirit experience, this word experience, but I was content with my what had developed into cessationism until I fell in love with a girl who one day told me that she spoke in tongues, and she is now my wife. And so that started a whole journey. It's kind of a funny story, but I'll spare because we'll have other stories to tell today. But that kind of led me on a journey of really beginning to research what does the scripture really say, because my cessationism, I knew, wasn't really rooted in the scripture. I mean, I thought it did, but I knew I didn't have really great arguments. I just wanted to dive in and really answer this particular question. And the more I dove in, the more I became convinced. And part of that journey involved reading the same books that you mentioned, Jack Deere's Surprised by the Power of the Spirit and Surprised by the Voice of God. And what really attracted me to these books was this guy was a Dallas Theological Seminary professor, at least formerly. This was a theologian, a lexicographer. This guy was in academia from the Christian in the Christian stream, and so he had the word side down really well. But then, he had stories in his book about just insane healings and very well documented. Not just like, hey, I think some people might have got healed of a headache, woo, but it was just like very documented. And so I, just like you, Miller, I prayed, Lord, would you let me be discipled by Jack Deere someday? Again, thinking he was in Montana. And my first job out of college, I was a financial analyst, and I moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Come to find out, Jack was in the area. And so started going to his church, and he started holding these School of the Spirit meetings, is what he called them.
Oh yeah,
And
those were fun.
yeah,
Wednesday
and I
night,
think that's really one of those was a Wednesday night was the first time I saw you. You showed up, Miller, with your backwards hat.
backward cap,
Uh,
Young Life
yeah,
cap, all Young Life
yeah,
gear.
always got a hat. If you guys don't know this, one of Miller's nicknames is Hats. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's where I connected with you, and I think you came probably 6 or 8 months after I did. But then I met Jack, and I met him amidst a whole bunch of people, and the next time, it was like one Wednesday night, and like the next Wednesday night I was walking in. I drove over from my financial analyst job, and I'm going to get my training in the spiritual gifts and figure out how this stuff works. And Jack was the one doing the training, and he was walking into the church at the same time I was walking into the church. I was late because I had a job. Jack was just late because he was characteristically late. and,
That's totally true, dude.
and
He's
so
notoriously
we
late.
meet in the parking lot. He met me one time the week prior amidst 100 other people, and he goes, "Oh, hey, Michael," and he remembered my name, and I was kind of shocked by that. And I found out later that his discipler, his name was Scott Manley, through Young Life. Scott Manley actually used to live in Oklahoma City. He's gone to be with the Lord now, but Scott would teach Jack, like, really work at remembering people's names because it really helps them feel special. And so Jack always worked at that. And so anyway, so he remembered my name, and which does touch on a big discipleship theme we'll talk about here in a little bit. But that struck up a friendship, and long story short, I moved over from financial analyst to youth pastor, and then went from youth pastor to associate pastor to senior pastor, and I was there for 17 years in total. So anyway, so that's pretty much how I got connected with Jack Deere, and it was an answer to a prayer, just like it was for you. So.
Well, that bit about remembering the names, I remember him actually getting on to me for not remembering names. I didn't know back then that I was ADD and ADHD. I didn't have that diagnosis, but it was actually an area I always felt a lot of shame about because my short-term memory was just never there. I would try so hard to remember names, and I would even have a notebook that I would bring out, and it was a Young Life value. But that also was something Jack, he always consistently did. And it was because he wanted to make sure that people knew that he saw them and remembered them and knew them and cared for them. So
Yeah.
that's kind of funny. Yeah.
Yeah, but like I said, this kind of touches on the discipleship thing. That sounds like a little thing, the names, but he learned that from a guy who had discipled him, Scott Manley, and instilled in Jack the importance of not just names, but just disciple making. And so Jack took an interest in me, and we started going to lunch. We started working out together. We started doing a lot of things together, some things that were spiritual and some things that weren't spiritual. And then he would gather a lot of the younger guys, like 20 somethings in the church, and he would spend a lot of time really pouring into them. And I remember just talking about this with him, and I said something to the effect of, like, thank you for the investment that you've made in my life, or something to that effect. And he said, "It's not an investment." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I just enjoy being with you." He said, "An investment sounds like a transaction. This isn't just a transaction that I'm trying to, like, get more fruit in my ministry. This is just, I like you. I like being around you. And I like spending time with people to just because I like them." And I just thought that was interesting. But he quoted scripture. He quoted Mark chapter 3, where it says of Jesus, he called to himself those he wanted, that he might be with them, and that he might send them out to preach and to cast out demons. And that there's so much in that verse in Mark chapter 3. He said, but first of all, he actually wanted to be around them. And so Jesus's disciples were not just sheer investments. He actually liked them. And then also from our end, that kind of pivots into another really big emphasis for Jack that's become an emphasis for Miller and for me. My church certainly hears this preached for me every week. I'm talking about friendship with Jesus. And he'll go, Jack would go to that verse about Jesus calling his disciples, and he would say, what we do when we read those verses is we skip right over there to preach and cast out demons. Like, okay, good, the exciting stuff, but we skip those three important words: be with him. He called those he wanted that they might be with him and then send them out. And he said, and that's the most important part. So that became like this model for how he wanted to disciple people. He just wanted to spend time with them, to enjoy one another's company. And so we went hunting together. I mean, I remember Jack paying for me to receive professional shotgun shooting lessons. Jack was big on his guns. And
Well,
it was funny because we'd travel with him and he'd go up into we'd be in the Northeast. He'd be telling a shooting story and you could feel the discomfort in the room. Then you go to like Texas or Oklahoma and they'd be like, yeah. but we just did a lot together because that was the be with him. And so it became this model for discipleship, but it also became this model for friendship with Jesus. And he would talk a lot about just enjoying Jesus, and all of your ministry flows out of that friendship. And which really, anyway, there's a lot that I could say there, Miller.
yeah, I mean, I think I wanted to do this episode for our audience just because I want people to get to peek behind the curtain a little bit about who we are as people and how we were shaped and formed. When we talk about friendship with God, this value that Jack held, and I mean, probably his highest value, um, I can say that he certainly did live this out with us. Jack isn't perfect by any means, but in this particular area, Jack would create opportunities for all of us to get time together. He was also a bit of a foodie, and so he would always find some business guy at the church who had a nice house. He liked nice things too, and so some business guy who had a nice house, and then they would cater some sort of lunch, and we'd all hang out. But it was always in the midst of that prayer and ministry opportunities would happen. And so for Michael and I, who were brand new to the gifts, that wanted to be discipled by Jack for that very reason, um, it was always created around just time together. So like I can remember praying for a young woman named Sarah who had Raynaud's. Do you remember being there at this luncheon? It was like me, you, Alex, Jeremy, Rachel. It was a whole group of us young people. We had all gone over to some person's house. I can't remember whose house it was, but we had a
I
catered lunch. Go
I,
ahead.
I remember it vaguely, but keep going.
Well, he had just been. So Sarah came. So my best friend Bryce was in town, and he and his wife had brought their friend Sarah, and so we all went out to lunch or at this guy's house. And Jack just sat there asking Sarah questions and finds out about this infirmity that she has, which is incurable. There's no cure for Raynaud's. It's just you just suffer. That's
What
the
is
way it
it?
goes. So it's where the capillaries in the skin become really constrictive and they don't allow blood to flow. And so your fingers, toes, hands, feet, they get really numb and very cold very easily. And so it's extraordinarily painful for those who have it. Um, and I don't know if it's genetic or why exactly people get this, but when Jack started asking her questions, he just said, "All right, hey everybody, let's get in the room. I want everybody to come over here. We want to pray for Sarah." And so he just stopped the hang and be like, "All right, it's ministry time now." And and so he said, and he would give us just practical instruction. Let's stop and let's just ask the Lord, when did this start for Sarah, and why did this happen? And so we all just quieted down and listened. And Alex says, "Well, I got this picture of Sarah when she was a young girl disappointing. She had disappointed her father." And Jack looks over at Sarah and he goes, "Is that true, Sarah? Did you have a moment in time where you disappointed your dad that really stands out to you?" And she goes, "Yes." And she kind of looked down, like almost tearful and shameful. And she said she went on to describe a story about how she had brought like a B home on a test, and her dad was irate. And so then Jack looks at her and he says, "Sarah, did you make an oath to never disappoint your dad again?" And she said, "Yes." And she started crying. And so Jack walked her through a prayer of repentance, breaking that oath. And we watched her get healed of an incurable infirmity right
Hmm.
after that. And
Yeah.
so I think what was great about this was it was so natural to go into this. This was just Jack caring for somebody by hearing their story and saying, "Okay, well, let's not stop there with me just being a listening ear. Let's actually pray for you." And so, and in that, he was actually discipling all of us because I didn't know how to pray for a condition like this. I didn't even know what this condition was.
Yeah.
And so, those kind of
Yeah.
leading questions were super
Uh,
helpful.
I can't remember. Were you there when we prayed for Laura at Wellspring, who had multiple personalities? Do you know that? Do you remember? Were
No,
you
I
there?
wasn't there. That I know of this story, but I wasn't there for
Okay.
that.
Yeah, she had multiple personalities, and it was, obviously a huge deal. And I mean, I had no idea even where to begin in praying for this. And one thing about Jack is he's very, um, he doesn't have a formula for how he does anything. Like what Miller
But
just described,
he
that's
asks
his
good
formula.
questions. Yeah.
Yeah, he does. And but really like friendship with Jesus is his formula. He just listens
Right.
to the Lord to see. And then when he's praying with people, he invites everybody to be part of that. And so we met with Laura. We set like a number of weeks in a row. It was probably at least a month of once a week. We were spending several hours and just praying with her. And, we'd ask this question and that question. We'd seek the Lord, and somebody would see this certain picture and like, hey, did this happen? And yes, it happened. And we kind of pray about that memory. And we went on and on in this way. Well, to make a long story short, she actually ended up walking in total freedom from multiple personality disorders. There was some inner healing involved. There was some deliverance ministry involved, and it was totally life-changing for Laura and her family. And she had a big family. And but one of the things it showed was like, he would talk about friendship with Jesus every Sunday, but then when it came to ministry, that was also his playbook. I'm going to be in friendship with Jesus and his people, and we're just going to listen to the Lord and see what, by the Spirit, he reveals. And that's our playbook. And it doesn't mean that he hadn't like learned some helpful tactics along the way. Like, he would sometimes say like, hey, when you cast out demons, this can sometimes be helpful, those kind of things. Like, it's not like he had no tips or guidance for it, but it really all came back to listening to the Lord for his guidance and then just acting on what you sensed he was leading. So that was a big thing for me. I mean, I was just at Josh's church last night, praying for people. And again, I don't want us to get bogged down in stories, but we saw a pretty radical healing that was just a result of a group of people listening to the Lord together and responding to those promptings. And anyway, I got a text message that she was running around telling
Yeah.
the neighbors about it and laughing and crying and all of this. So
That's a great
really,
text to get this morning from Josh too.
yeah,
Like him
yeah.
hearing
So
about it as well.
yeah, but I learned that from Jack. So uh,
Yeah. I'll tell you one of the most significant moments I had with Jack that was really affirming. You got to remember, those of you in this audience, you don't know this, but my dad wasn't around. So I had my brother as the closest thing to a role model. But when it came to just hearing the words, I'm proud of you, son, or that kind of thing, I didn't have much of that. But I remember we had just done a meeting in Abilene, Texas, and I prayed for the pastor he had broken his ankle, had surgery, and then broke it again. And so Jack was paying for the meal, which is the other thing about Jack. He paid for every meal. Um, and I'm talking to the pastor about his ankle problem and asked him if I can pray for him. And I prayed for him, and his ankle popped in my hands. And he goes, "Whoa, did you hear that?" And I was like, "Yeah." I'm like, right here. And he starts jumping up and down and just super excited. And he tells Jack, and we walk out into the parking lot. The pastor gets into his car. But before we get into Jack's car, Jack puts his arm around me and goes, "Well done, son." Which, you know, one, I was never called anybody's son. That never happened. Two, hearing the well done from somebody that I looked up to so much meant a lot to me. And it gave me a lot of affirmation. So I don't know if that's a lesson learned other than just something that he did for me. He made me value what he valued in many ways, and then affirmed me when I walked in those values in ways that
yeah.
I hadn't gotten as a kid. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it was that way for me too. And I know that I was, in my early 20s when it started, and I was hoping for a spiritual father, somebody to kind of disciple me. So it kind of worked out perfectly in that way, and an answer to prayer and all of this. And plus, to be perfectly honest, I was on the starstruck side as a young 20 something in this, at least Christian version of famous guy. And that actually led to some problems for me because there was just this finding my worth and value in this sort of connection. Because I was like if he was my Paul, I was his Timothy, and I felt a certain worth in that. And so when it came to situations where it felt like maybe something, I hate to say it, like needed someone to correct it, but I was the one who observed it or whatever it was. In the early years, I didn't. and then when I started to kind of develop that muscle, well, I mean, I remember, and this is part of the thing, because Jack was a great discipler and a great theologian. At least with our church, he wasn't a great pastor, and
No.
he admits that in his book. So I'm not like throwing him under the bus here. He says that in his book, even in our darkness. He says he was waiting for the cool people to come around, which Jack was brutally honest. That was a positive lesson
That's one of the
that he taught
biggest.
us
Yeah.
was, he would always say things like, and I repeat these to my church all the time, when it comes to secrets, if you can't talk about it, it owns you. Or we all need a few best friends with whom we can share all of our secrets. And those things really had an impression on me, and I'd always been probably more likely to overshare than to undershare anyway. But it became really central for me. But back
It
to
also
the
built you and I's friendship, Michael. And
yeah.
because of that intentionality to not have any secrets, you and I would often come to each other with our shame very quickly because Jack was so shameless in sharing his most shameful acts. And he did that quite well from the front. He would also say, which I'm sure you've quoted multiple times, um, pastors are notorious for portraying the portrait of a holy man that doesn't exist. And it was actually him doing that that gave us the freedom to do so ourselves, as I recall.
Yeah, exactly. And so he modeled that really well, but because of I mean, counselor speak, I had this sort of codependence with Jack that
Hmm.
it was hard for me to bring those kinds of things up. And Jack was suffering a whole lot in that season. So when I say that he wasn't a good pastor in that season, and again, Jack has said this many times publicly about himself in the most public ways. Because he wasn't a good pastor in that season, there were things that, by the time I was an associate/executive pastor, um, I could see things where it's like, man, we really need our pastor to kind of step in here. He was kind of distant because he traveled so much. I mean, Miller and I, we got the best of him. The rest of the church, not as much. And when he was present, because he was suffering a lot, he was pretty angry. And and Miller, I remember one time when he ripped you a new one,
He
like
did. Yeah.
as much as I have ever seen anyone rip someone a new one. And you were trying to, you were nervous, like you were trembling, and
Oh, I
um,
was terrified. Well, I was starstruck with them too.
yeah.
You weren't the
So
only one. Like I had a bit of again, I didn't have a dad, so the closest thing to a father figure I had was my brother, my uncle, and then Jack. Um, and yeah, I remember I had, this is one of the areas where I faulted Jack was he would presume to know my motives. And the funny thing is he would teach not to do that, but he would still do it himself on occasion. And I was confronting him about that very thing, but it was also, look, man, I was a kid. I didn't know how to do this in any kind of positive way. And I was terrified of disappointing Jack too. So when I was confronting him about how I felt hurt that he presumed to know my motives, uh, he was also in a place in life where things were incredibly painful for him, and this is the worst time to bring something up. But yes, I mean, Michael, this was this. I know this was one of your areas of failure. You wish that you had stood up for me in that moment. But both you and Jack also apologized to me, and this is something that Jack, I can also say, is true. Is he it may have taken him some time, but he always did. Uh, well, he not always did. He did with me at least own the harshness with which he spoke to me,
yeah.
and that actually was meaningful. I'd already forgiven him and moved on, but you know,
Yeah.
still important.
Yeah, but I'm thankful for the season. It's an important lesson that sometimes you got to learn is that your heroes are human. And Jack was human, and he had a whole lot of strengths, and he also had some weaknesses. And I gradually, by God's grace, was able to bring up all the things in a very direct way that I needed to bring up with him, and made our
Hallelujah.
relationship rocky for a time. But like you said, Miller, he could own things, and we worked through things. And so that was just an important part of my sanctification and just coming out of that starstruck perspective. And I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad for just what God did in me in that experience. Even just when I reflect on kind of where we're at with Remnant Radio today, is there are a lot of situations that call for hard truth telling. And man, just being a senior pastor, I feel like there's a hard conversation with somebody every week. I mean, it's just kind of you can't do your job without that. And so I learned it in that season, but it was pretty tough. And when I say suffering, that was one thing that I learned from Jack, not so much because of what he said, but just because of what he suffered, how to not waste your pain. Jack's,
Mm.
when Jack, the truth is he never
Good
should have
theology
actually,
behind pain too.
yeah, true. The theology behind pain. He was big on sovereignty and suffering, but, the truth is that, Jack, he had lost his son in a tragic way, suicide, in December 2000. And then he took over as pastor at Wellspring in 2004, and he just wasn't ready yet. He just wasn't healed yet. And so, and then on top of that, his wife was definitely also not ready. And she was advancing through stages of alcoholism, but as happens to loved ones of alcoholics, Jack didn't recognize it yet. And so, for like the first couple of years, I never even saw Lisa at church. And they even separated for a time. I mean, it was just
Messy.
it was very messy.
Well,
And
you
again,
had
I
the
was in my
bulk of that
20s. I
too.
didn't have a playbook for how to deal with this. I'm like, who do I even go to? And anyway,
Yeah.
we did ultimately work through it, and all the hard conversations that needed to happen happened. But independent of all of that, and the pastoral dimension that made that complicated, he really shouldn't have been doing that in that season. Aside from that, Jack actually did show me how not to waste his pain, and the way he would talk about it, the way he'd be honest about it, and the way he would seek God in it really taught me a lot.
When I didn't believe this when I was there. When we were all together at Wellspring, I struggled to believe that God was really good in the midst of my pain. Jack did, and he suffered. He suffered a lot. Grew up in a fatherless home because his dad committed suicide, and he has a son who commits a drug-induced suicide. And then, watching stuff with his wife. I mean, it was rough. But Jack did such a. I mean, he really did believe God was good despite all of that, and he displayed a level of peace and stability in the midst of it. And I mean, I wouldn't say he was a stable pastor, but I mean a stable in the midst of all the pain. He displayed a level of stableness in his faith that I didn't have, and I really struggled with that. And it would be years later before I would really begin to recall the things that he taught and go, okay, wow, that's really true. That God doesn't waste our pain, that He can redeem all of it, that there's no tear that gets wasted. That he would say stuff like, I've suffered in my life for things that I've done wrong, and I've suffered in life for things I didn't deserve, but I've never had suffering I didn't need. And he was saying that the suffering, both the things he deserved and the things he didn't deserve, were always used by God to actually make him more like Christ. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I as a pastor today, those words have been invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
As I've dealt with people who've lost kids, loved ones, disappointment, betrayal, gone through it myself, I see the value in those words and I see the truth of them. But it's like some things in life, like Jack understood and knew, but it's just really hard to believe the truth of them until you actually go through similar experiences. But he
Yeah.
had a great theology of suffering.
Yeah. And when you think about that, the theology of suffering, you and I were both coming into a theology of healing. We were kind of
Oh
like,
yeah,
okay, we got the
yeah,
suffering thing down. We've been in Baptist churches, and we talk
yeah,
about,
yeah. That's right.
we
Yeah.
talk about these things sometimes, but at the same moment, we're coming into this faith and a theology of healing. Uh, we have this pastor who is going through the ringer. I mean, how
Mhm.
much more suffering can you go through? I don't know, than to lose your son in that way and have your wife going through this, and you've got your own stuff you're working through. I mean, it was a lot, and and to even just draw out like just the theological import of that for us is that, when you're coming into the charismatic space, there's a whole lot of like triumphalism out there, a whole lot of like, well, as long as you have enough faith, God will always heal the person. I mean, there's just a lot of in like the word of faith space. Jack wasn't any of that. Like he held together a robust theology of suffering as well as a theology of healing. And I think churches tend to go with one or the other. They'll have a theology of suffering and that's all they talk about, or they have a theology of healing and that's all they talk about. But there's this reality we talk about on the show. We call it the already but not yet of the kingdom. And the kingdom is here, and Jesus is demonstrating that reign and giving a foretaste of the age to come, and the demons are going and the sicknesses are getting healed and all of this. And so we have this already down payment, but oftentimes those things don't happen. And oftentimes you're walking through this horrific pain, and we're sitting in it, watching it with our eyes. And I think that had a profound theological impact. And I'll also say practically on a pastoral side, I hadn't had experience with addiction personally, nor with any of my loved ones. I mean, I did have a grandpa that died from alcohol, but no direct experience. And to see the progression of the stages, and I learned about stage 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and I read the Alcoholics Anonymous big book because Jack was talking about it all the time, and
he was teaching us as he was learning.
Yeah, and so I learned so much about addiction, and I think that really helped me a lot pastorally because there are times when somebody falls into sin, and there are times when somebody is locked into an addiction, and they're not exactly the same thing, and it's not as simple as, oh well, you're just too weak. Lisa Deere was an incredibly strong person. This wasn't just because she was like, quote, so weak that. And we don't have time to get into it all, but I just beginning to understand the humanity and the pain and the struggle behind addiction really helped me a lot as a pastor.
Yeah, I didn't have to get behind the scenes on a lot of that stuff, Michael. I wasn't on staff at the church. I was working outside the church and leading some of the ministries within the church. But you were dealing with that on a regular basis, and it was quite a different experience. But I'll tell you, the other thing that Jack did was he normalized the talking about our sin. And he did that by talking about that particular struggle. And yeah, I think that, how do I say this? He allowed the worst versions of ourselves to come forward and be accepted, embraced. And he was also teaching us about shame and how that keeps us silent. So one of the best sermons I ever heard was Jack preaching on walking in the light. Now you would think that the gift sermons would be the ones I'd remember the most, but I remember these other ones the most. Walking in the light in particular. And just curious, Rowntree, what's the sermon like? If you were to think of like a typical Jack sermon, or just the one that you remember the most, is there one that stands out to you?
Gosh, I'd have to say his shame series was really powerful. I mean, like everyone in that series. But like when you talk about Jack preaching, I mean, this is interesting because Jack taught me how to preach, and I mean, I didn't have any background in it, and he just he'd have me send him my outlines, and he'd mark it up with he'd print them off, and it would just be covered in red ink, and it hurt my feelings, and but I'd deal with it.
Yeah, totally. Because it's a work of art when you put together a sermon.
But
it really is.
So there was both, like there was the logical flow, there was the exegesis, and he was really big on the power of story. Jack told stories in his sermons, and so you tend to get people who are like, I preach through books of the Bible, and I barely use any illustration at all, or I just kind of get up there and tell stories and quote a Bible verse here and there. And so, Jack would really, I would say this, I think I saw a development in him. In the first years, I would say he was diving deep into the word and then also telling a lot of stories. I would say in his later years, especially as he got older and he was kind of just traveling to conferences and doing stuff like that, usually his preaching In
Well,
my
when you checked
opinion,
out of
I
the
think he
church,
went too far. I think he went too far in the telling stories category because I'm kind of like, Jack, you're a theologian. You're in the Word every day. Like, give us some of that good stuff. And so I think he actually went too far the other way. But I think there is, at least originally, he kind of taught me this balance of do the exposition, do the exegesis, but also um, tell the stories. And I know some preachers don't want to tell
why did
personal
the
stories in a sermon, and they caution against it, and you don't want to make it all about you. And I get that, but Jack was the opposite. He's like, people need to know, like, how are you living out these truths, or how are you failing to live out these truths, and just be honest. And I found that to be very, very helpful.
um, you mentioned the shame series. Why was that so impactful?
Well, it seemed to coincide with when Jack had you and me and
Uh-huh.
about four or five other guys, and he was so at the time Lisa had gone to an alcohol rehab called the Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona. It's like a super, I mean, it's very well known, and found a lot of freedom there. And they had like a survivors weekend for families that would go. And Jack went, and he learned a lot from that, but he's kind of filtering it through biblical principles and all of this. And so he came back and he wanted to kind of share some of the things he was learning. And so that's how Jack was. Like, he just share whatever he was learning. Sometimes he's reading about, the markets, and sometimes he's reading about shame. I mean,
Golf.
just golf, whatever. And
Yeah.
he was like an encyclopedia and always learning things and talking to you about it. But in this case, he was learning about emotional health, and wasn't something they had a lot of in his home growing up. And so I remember sitting in that small group with you, Miller, and Jack would ask these 20-something guys, say, "So, how are you feeling this morning?" And each of us would go around. You're laughing because and we'd all
Oh
say,
yeah.
"Good, good, 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 good." And he goes, "That's BS. Not all of you are doing good." And he start calling us out. And then he'd go like, "How are you really doing?" We go around and be like, "Terrible, terrible, terrible."
Michael, your
Uh,
wife had just
yeah,
you'd had a miscarriage, and you were cracking jokes, and I remember Jack called you out on it.
yeah, I
He's
did. I'd had a miscarriage. My wife's had 3 miscarriages. And after one of them, I expressed this pain, but then I like cracked a joke at the end. And he goes, "Michael, why'd you crack a joke there? That's not funny at all." And basically made it plain that I use humor to mask pain. Still do it.
You
um,
know, I remember that being monumental for me just watching it happen because, Michael, I also saw you actually start crying and really grieving what was horribly painful that you hadn't let anybody else in on and hadn't even really processed yourself.
mhm.
And so Jack was actually helping us to deal with our own broken states and be really honest again about them.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Yeah.
and he taught us not to give advice that was unasked for. You remember that?
Yeah. Yeah.
What would he
For
say
sure.
about,
Uh,
unasked for advice?
well, like if you say like, "Hey, you should do this, you should do that," he would say, "Stop shooting all over that person." So,
He
uh,
had good use of humor too, obviously.
yeah, you know, so this might be a surprise to some of our viewers, kind of the topics that we've been really addressing in terms of our discipleship with Jack. Maybe you expected us to talk all about the prophecy and the healing and the theology and all of that. But there were all these other lessons too. But Miller, maybe we could talk about some of that other stuff, the prophecy, the healing, the theology. I
Oh,
don't know, pick
theology
it
would be a
pick
big
it
one.
up
I
wherever you
love
want to.
there.
Yeah.
So we did a group, just a few of the people he discipled, mostly guys, some girls. I always remember Lisa would make these like gourmet meals and hot chocolate, and then we would go through Wayne Grudem's systematic theology, and we would all come with a position, either agreeing or disagreeing. And most of the time we agreed because Wayne Grudem was the smartest man we'd ever interacted with at that time or read. And then Jack, he would just tear apart our arguments. And
Hmm.
what he did was he wasn't necessarily trying to prove us wrong. He was trying to prove to us that we didn't really know what we were talking about. That despite having read a book, we still couldn't prove anything. And he would say stuff like, um, you really don't can't claim to know what the scriptures say unless you can quote the verse verbatim and give the citation. And so that
Yeah,
became
actually,
standard
so the quote was, "You only know as much theology as you can produce in the spot, on the spot,
on the spot.
by quoting it from the scripture." And he would share about PhD students who he would say, like, when he was testing them, he'd say, "Okay, tell me the gospel," and they would tell him
Mhm.
the gospel, and then but the more he pressed, the less articulate they became when it came to like identifying sections of scripture for these scholarly arguments that they were stating. So that's what he would say. You'd only know as much theology as you can produce on the spot from the scripture. He said, if you get the chapter, that's enough. But Miller, I went from there and I developed a whole systematic theology. This is actually what you were texting me about this weekend. You said, "Hey, can
Yeah.
you send me what you're training your elders in?" And so I walked our elders through a 12-week training on systematic theology, and we talked about God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the humanity of Christ, the deity of Christ. We talked about eschatology, all the things, but broke it down into categories and chapters and verses for all of it. And anyway, but Jack's the one who taught me how to do that. But Miller, I think I cut you off a little bit.
Oh, no, I think the other part of it was okay, one, we then had a new standard for how to prove what we actually know and how to actually show that we know something and know something at all. But the other part of it was he was tearing apart our arguments. And these were things that he actually himself already believed. So it wasn't so much about us uh, believing exactly as he did, but rather getting us to think critically about the scriptures, about theology, and building a doctrine. He wanted us to think critically when it came to exegeting a text, like how do you know the text really means this and not this? And so he was teaching us critical thinking skills at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And he was teaching us how to dissect the text. And so he was doing that through a systematic theology book, which I thought, I mean, it really is impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he had a word for that. It was something like, I think he called it oppositional thinking. And he's like, whenever someone's making an argument, just think about the best argument against it and then make it. um, but when it came to and Jack was very good at that. You did not want to get in a debate with Jack. um, the other thing is, I remember Miller walking through like Bible studies at his house, and he'd be like, "What do you want to study?" And anyway, we end up landing on the book of Matthew, and we spend like a million years in the book of Matthew, and just each week meet there for a few hours, and we would just talk about the text. But the thing that I learned the most from that was understanding the flow of the argument of the text, and that's something that I've really tried to hone. And even when I read scholarly commentaries, a lot of times they're very focused on, say, the bark of the tree, but like seeing the whole forest, or seeing just the direction and the flow of the overarching argument. For instance, what I remember in the book of Matthew, I remember when Jack talked about, so why do you think Matthew starts with his genealogy, but Luke doesn't share his genealogy until chapter 3? And then why do you think it is that, and you get us comparing the two, and why do you think it is that Matthew doesn't share the whole thing? He only goes back to Abraham, but Luke goes back to,
Yeah.
to Adam. And in fact, he actually goes in reverse and says, son of, son of, son of. Anyway, and so he walked us through those questions, and we began to just discuss, and helped us see that, for instance, when Luke is going in reverse and saying son of, son of, son of, and it finishes with son of Adam, son of God, the next word is Jesus, and it's entering into the temptation narrative, where Jesus, as our better son of God, our better Adam, is going to pass the test in the wilderness against the devil, where where Adam failed the test in a perfect paradise against the devil. And so he helped us see these links, and I started to do that when I would preach through books of the Bible, start to understand the context. That was really helpful.
Yeah. Michael, uh, did you walk away when it came to theology? Did you walk away agreeing with most of his theology? Was there areas of disagreement that you had after the fact?
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to reverse the question to you first because I need to think about it.
Okay.
What about for you?
Um, when it came to stories, uh, and topical preaching. I've departed from Jack there. I actually think it's really important to teach people entire books of the Bible. But I also think we're living in a day and age where people are incredibly biblically illiterate. And the funny thing is that Jack would do this in Sunday school. Like he would go through the book of Acts. He would do a study on biblical eldership and just go through the book of
Proverbs.
Acts,
Yeah.
and then and go through the Proverbs. And those times were some of the most helpful times for me because I wasn't just learning content. I was learning how to exegete a passage. I was learning from his public exegesis. And so I have. It's funny because he would say that preachers should teach topically, like that was kind of his thing. But yet when he did his Sunday school time, that was the most profitable for me. And so I think we're living in a day and age where people are incredibly biblically illiterate, and all the more reason for why we should do that. So I would depart from him there. He was a compatibilist, so he believed that both free will and predestination,
Which
as
he
it's
always
defined
he
in
always
Calvinism.
clarified as free choice to differentiate between that and libertarian free
Yes.
will. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, he would say that they were compatible. I'm not on the Calvinistic side of things. Although I also have to caveat with I have a high view of God's sovereignty, so I'm not on the open theist side of things. Um, Although I flirted with it for a time. So yeah, I probably departed. But uh, those areas were so small when I think about it. For a time, I was leaning more egalitarian, and then I came back over to the complementarian side. So I ended up agreeing with him. Um, Trying to think of other areas that I departed from Jack on. Um,
I mean, while I was there, I don't remember departing from him on anything significant. Um, I will say I don't even think Jack knows I'm an amillennialist, and so he's definitely not that. And but if you ask Jack what his eschatology is, I mean, I don't love this answer, but he's like, I don't care.
yeah,
And yeah,
I
he came
yeah.
from Dallas where it was very dispensationalist, and he's not dispensationalist, but he's just kind of like, eh. But when I would talk to him about some amillennialist interpretations, it definitely was not welcomed with open
Oh no,
arms.
he didn't.
So
He
he's
didn't like
probably
millennialism.
historic pre-mill. But yeah, I think that would be the biggest departure. Hey Miller, what do you think about this quote from Dr. Right Life, who says, um, how did Deere from Dallas Seminary get into what the Message and Latter Day Rain was doing by showmanship and miscellaneous narratives?
And these are
Do you want
really
to
bad
correct the record
characterizations.
here?
Yeah, Jack obviously condemned the latter rain. As far as what was put the quote back up there. I need to read this again.
Okay, it was the Message and Latter Day Rain, like William
Uh,
Branham.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, Jack, he one didn't like the way that prophecy was done. He did come under the influence of Paul Cain, which he later condemned completely. But how he came out of DTS to latter rain, he didn't ever embrace the latter rain. He didn't believe that the latter rain eschatological idea that there was an early pouring out of the Spirit that happened at Pentecost, and we're now living in a day where God is pouring out His Spirit as a latter rain. So the movement, and it was named after its eschatology, of which Jack never agreed with. And then when it came to the message, I'm not even sure how they're getting that affiliation.
Yeah,
What do they mean by
I
the
don't
message?
know. I mean, I probably heard in my 2 decades of knowing Jack Deere, I probably heard him mention William Branham approximately 0 times. If I ever did, I
He
never heard
wasn't
him.
a fan of William Branham, but he also
Um,
wasn't a fan of putting prophets on a stage to teach. He actually thought most of the teaching is not good. Um, and I mean, if you've seen his most recent public disclosure about Paul Cain and the unpublished chapter from his last book, or I guess it was highly edited because of Mike Bickle's influence that Jack obviously tried to make right by republishing. You see him very much condemning um, Paul Cain, his manipulations through prophecy, his fakery, as well as was some of the other things that Paul did. I mean, one of the biggest quotes from his chapter was uh, Paul Cain had predicted that an earthquake would be there on the day he arrived in Anaheim at John Wimber's church. Jack said, at the time, I thought, who is this person whose calling sign is an earthquake? Um, And yet, what I couldn't see is that the earthquake was actually a sign not of the gift that Paul was, but the destruction that would be left in his wake. I mean, those are
Yeah.
pretty strong words to talk about somebody who came out of latter rain. So, Jack, again, I'm not sure where they're getting this information, but that's kind of how it
Yeah.
is. It's like you've got Hollywood
Yeah, and
saying that
I'd
are.
have to go look, but I feel like I saw one time a long time ago on a Google search Jack quoting some like long before I ever met him something about Joel's army and like the wrong interpretation of it from the latter rain movement about this last days kind of revival of warriors God's going to raise up, which is totally not what that passage is about. Um, Maybe he said something somewhere that kind of agrees with that theology because he did come under Paul Cain's influence for a time. We never heard that from him in these last 2 decades. All we ever heard was the most vehement opposition to Paul Cain, suggesting he's probably an unbeliever, things of that
He says
nature.
he's
And
agnostic about Paul's salvation. I mean,
yeah,
that's a pretty strong statement.
yeah, and also we saw with Rick Joyner where Jack Joyner and I can't remember who the third person was who was on the restoration team
Oh, it's
for
Bill
Todd
Johnson.
Bill Johnson on the
Yeah,
restoration
yeah.
team for Todd Bentley, and Jack started out. I mean, he was just kind of named. He's like, okay, well, if I'm going to be on the team, we're going to do it the right way. And he just saw all the same kind of shenanigans we're seeing today from Joyner, and was just like, no, there has to be actual repentance of sin. And at the time, I didn't even ask Jack what was meant by restoration. My guess is that he probably only meant just restoration to Christ, not ministry. Jack was not enthralled by Todd Bentley at all, and so either way, when it came down to it, he and Joyner had a huge falling out. I don't know that they've talked since then, and it was a very many years ago, because
Oh,
Jack
no,
said,
Jack.
"No,
Yeah.
repentance is the only way to get right with God, and I can't stand for these things happening." And he said that, and so it was a falling out. So I know Jack has opposed those things. There might have been a season before we were there where Jack said some off base things that aligned with latter rain ish, but I'm telling you, he never he's never gone in those places for as long as I've known him.
Yeah. Well, I would, here's a lesson learned. Jack stood up for truth when it cost him his relationships. Any influence that he would have had with Bill Johnson ended when Jack basically said, "Where were you on this?" And same thing with Rick Joyner. Jack ended that friendship because he looked at what Rick was doing and said, "This is wrong. This person is not repentant. Nobody has even talked to this man's ex-wife." And so Jack took some shots publicly for doing the right thing and saying this person should not be in ministry. So, and we've, I think we are trying to emulate that as best as we can on our podcast as well. When we know for sure that somebody is unrepentant in their sin, or they're giving like public prophecies that we think are actually false, and they're unrepentant and giving these false predictions that don't come to pass, or they're just meaningless, we call it out. And I mean, I don't know about you, Michael. I've definitely lost friends from the past who like the people that we are saying don't follow this person.
Yeah,
So
for
Jack
sure.
Jack displayed that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Miller, talk to us about prophetic because we touched a little bit on healing in association with this
Sure.
theology of suffering. We've talked a little bit about, I guess, deliverance ministry and the story I told about Laura. Talk to us about prophetic ministry because you came in and had no grid for that. When you came, you had spoken in tongues before, and
Mhm.
that was about the extent. And I think seen a healing, but hadn't seen a whole lot in this supernatural space, so called, and prophetic ministry was completely alien to you. And then you went to Wellspring, Jack's church, and suddenly like people are prophesying from the stage, and their prophetic teams praying over people after the service. And ultimately, you as well as I were traveling around with Jack and doing prophetic ministry. So talk to us about just what you learned from Jack in that space.
I mean, gosh, that well goes deep, Michael. Where do you want to start? I mean, I think he helped me see that God is infallible, prophets are fallible. What God speaks is surely inerrant, but people can mess those things up by misinterpreting and misapplying what God has said. He helped me understand that God speaking wasn't just necessarily an audible word for word thing, that sometimes God would speak in dreams or visions. And so what you're trying to do is put into human language things that God has revealed. And so there is an error, a margin for error in that. He would teach us things like, you get a revelation and then you need to interpret and then apply it. And he taught us principles for doing that. He taught us that first and foremost, God speaks through his word, and that is the only authoritative way in which God speaks. That is the most authoritative way. And so that all prophecy needs to be judged through the scriptures. I remember one thing when it came to like very practical wisdom, when it came to words that were directional, prophetic words that were directional in nature. He would say, never make a decision based solely off a prophetic word, that a prophetic word should do one of two things: either confirm a leading you already have in your heart or cause you to pray about something you've never considered. Gosh, I mean, this is just me on the spot, but I mean, those are things I can quote verbatim. I heard him say these things so many times. And he also taught me the value of prophecy. Like
Yeah.
he would share scriptures and then testimonies that would illustrate those scriptures, that would show how God truly would comfort his people by speaking today. That was outside of the scripture, but confirming what is in the scripture. That was a massive thing. Like he valued the voice of God, and he valued the gifts of the Spirit. He didn't look at these gifts that can be often messy and condemn them because of the messes we saw in his church and our own churches. He helped us to embrace being good at cleaning up messes and coaching people and correcting people without completely squashing them when it came to the gifts. He did that with us. And I got some pretty
Yeah.
harsh on
Yeah.
occasion, but
No, that's good. And I would say, yeah, all those things, but he also challenged me to grow in my gift. I remember being on a stage with him in North Dakota, and he said, we were doing prophetic ministry, and I had a few words that I was going to share, and but then I'm up there, and he says, "Hey, Michael, why don't you tune in?" That was his language for like listen to the Lord. He's like, "Why don't you tune in and see if the Lord will show you anyone who has faith to be healed?" And it's a reference to Acts chapter, I think it's 14, and Paul's in Lystra, and he sees that a crippled man has faith to be healed. And I'd always just kind of read over that story and not really paused on that statement and considered, like, how did Paul really know that the man had faith to be healed? Like, how did he see into that person's heart? And I was like, okay, but when you're on the spot and you're kind of like, you're looking around, who has faith to be healed? I don't know. And I just remember asking the Lord, who has faith to be healed? And then the Lord highlighted one particular guy, and I was kind of like, well, Lord, what does he want to be healed from? It's not like he came with crutches or something. So I asked the Lord, and I mean, it sounds minor, but if you suffer from it, it's maybe not that minor. But it's like I felt like the Lord had told me, like I had a strong sensing on dry eyes, like that he had severely dry eyes. And so, anyway, so I pointed out a guy in the audience, and I was like, "Hey, I felt like the Lord told me you had faith to be healed of dry eyes. Do you have dry eyes?" He's like, "Oh my gosh, yes, I have really dry eyes." And so we prayed for him, and so Jack kind of challenged us in those kinds of ways, and so that's something else too. I remember not just in prophetic, but all the gifts. So Miller, we're at about the 1 hour mark. Is there anything that you want to just kind of leave people with that's just like a nugget to take home or a summarizing statement about your time with Jack? Miller, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
press the button. Sorry about that. I was going to say my experience is, similar and different in some ways. I also came in with different kinds of baggage into a discipleship relationship with Jack than you came in. We both struggled with codependency. I struggled with feelings of worthlessness, and I struggled with abandonment issues that you didn't have the same struggle with. And so the thing about Jack, Jack has never been a perfect person. He'll be the first to tell you this. He's made mistakes. He's been very public and honest about those mistakes, like endorsing Paul Cain as a case in point for a time. But if it hadn't been for Jack, I don't think I could have been a pastor. I definitely don't think I could have been a good pastor. There are certain values that he instilled in us, values of being, he'd say stuff, again, he was quoting John Wimber, but he would say stuff like, ministry doesn't happen from a stage. And so I always took that to heart. I always knew that if I'm a good pastor, that means I actually know the people that I'm pastoring. I'm in their lives and they're in my life. That's part of the reason that I
Yeah.
don't like putting sermons online today, because I want to be able to preach to my church and have them know me and be known by me. Um, and he demonstrated it. He didn't just say ministry didn't happen from the stage. He demonstrated it by actually praying for people and creating opportunities to pray for people. And then always having a couple of young guys like you and I around him to learn how to do those things and pray with people. And
Yeah.
so my discipleship process is because of how Jack discipled me. Yeah, I think I'm deeply indebted to it. I think I have um, I hope I'm a good pastor. I want to be a good pastor, um, like genuinely. And I think Jack gave me a lot of tools to make that happen.
Yeah. That's good. You said deeply indebted. I think the same. I'm deeply indebted to Jack and what he gave me on all the things that we're talking about. I did say I don't think he was a good pastor in that season, and I don't think he was in a place to be pastoring in that season. I think the church honestly got the worst of Jack, and people were hurt as a result. On the other hand, I actually got the best of Jack. And so I have this sort of like mixed picture because he really did give me a lot. He gave you a lot, and not just in theology and spiritual things, but just in life and how to suffer well. And so I'm forever indebted to Jack for those things. And I did learn through that process. It's okay for your heroes to be human, and maybe we shouldn't make heroes of people. Maybe they should just be humans to us, and that would save us a lot of trouble. But I definitely know that the things that he imparted to me are really operative in my ministry today, whether that be in the word and spirit space, theology, exegesis, preaching, prophecy, healing, inner healing, deliverance, all of those things. And behind them all, friendship with God. I am so thankful for Jack, and just investing those things in me, because as he would say, it wasn't an investment. I just liked being around you, and that itself is its own compliment. And I know he considers me a spiritual son, and you the same, Miller. And so I feel like a son who had not a perfect dad, but a dad who did love me, and so I'm thankful for that. So I think that's what I would finish with. So I think that's about a wrap, guys. That's our time.
That's a wrap.
That's our time with Jack Deere. So as we're closing out this episode, just want to remind you guys to like the episode, subscribe to the channel, share this around if you'd like. And also subscribe to our newsletter. It's how you get in touch with all the things that we're doing. Love to see you at our conference in October. Love to see you join our e-course that's starting real soon. You got to sign up by September 7th. All those details are in the description, especially if you sign up for the newsletter. That's kind of your avenue for everything. So anyway, so that's a wrap, guys. God bless you guys, and have a great week.